That's right. Happy Monday. I tried putting that together for you guys this weekend, and I hope you enjoyed it. So it gives away what we're talking about this week, which are the 13 original colonies. We were talking a little bit about Jamestown and Roanoke last week. We're going to move on to another early starting colony today. We're going to talk about Plymouth. And you know it probably from stories about Thanksgiving and your Thanksgiving stuff. So what we're going to do is look at that. And I always like to call it, we know our friends up in Plymouth better as Pilgrims. And our Pilgrim friends came in, and again, it's kind of one of those accidents in history that starts taking. But we're going to talk about the Pilgrim experience in the Americas. And when you compare it to that of Jamestown, there are going to be some differences that I want you to pick up on, okay? So Puritans, plain and simple, Puritans are Pilgrims and Pilgrims are Puritans. They changed their name, and we'll get into why they do that here in a little bit. But the Puritans were a religious group that wanted to purify the Church of England. They were upset that the Church of England, they thought it had lost its way. They thought that it had gotten corrupt, that it had gotten too much money, too powerful. It was too cozy with the king. And, you know, since the King of England founded the Church of England, they're probably right. But you've got this situation where they're wanting to purify the Church of England, and they're looking at church bishops and priests as having a lot of power. They actually had lawmaking power. There was no separation of church and state in England at the time. So if you broke a church rule or a church law, you would go to a church court, and they could punish you up unto a death if that was possible. So, there's public beatings, and there was public, humiliations, and there was burning people at stakes and all sorts of wild stuff going on. So the Puritans thought that this was way too far and way out of hand, which I think any of you hearing that would agree. But the most extreme group of Puritans were a group of people known as separatists. Now, the separatists were a whole new level because they wanted to completely leave the Church of England, and they wanted to leave England completely and start a new church. So you have all sorts of things going on in England at this time. Now, keep in mind, Jamestown's there. People are talking about going to Jamestown, but there's still a lot of hairy stuff going down at Jamestown. But what happens is the Puritans, because they're seen as, well, this isn't good enough, and England's kind of the up-and-coming country, they're treated poorly in England. People, spit on them in the street, and they make fun of how they dress, and they, go after them for not only the beliefs, but for other things. They can't even get a job. If they found out you were a Puritan, you'd get fired. There were no job protections for people at that time. And that leads us to this idea of the Pilgrims, or what is a pilgrimage, which is a religious journey. One of the groups of Puritans left England, and they moved to the Netherlands. This is in 1608. Now, remember, if you pay attention, Jamestown was started in 1607. So it's only been a year with Jamestown, and by that time, Jamestown was in some bad shape. So they didn't want to go to Jamestown. Like I said, we talked about it last Friday. People were really hungry. You had reports of people fighting and killing each other just to get food. So the next best place was the Netherlands. If you don't know about the Netherlands, it's also known as Holland. The people there are called Dutch. Great chocolate. So we're going to go from there. So even though the Puritans are in the Netherlands, they're able to get jobs. They feel accepted. They're being treated fairly. They're being treated, well over there. The Dutch, the Dutch were fine. They were known to be very tolerant people. But the Puritans started freaking out because, frankly, their kids were coming home, and they might not have had those English accents. It wasn't like, hey, pop Cheerios. It was more like, Guten Tag, Mom and Dad. We love chocolate. And so it got a little weird. The parents kind of freaked out. They thought that the kids were becoming less British and becoming more Dutch, and that they were forgetting their English heritage. And so a lot of I keep calling them Pilgrims, the Puritans decide that they want to go back to England. Even though they're going to get mistreated, first and foremost, they feel like they're English. And it's important to remember, because that's one of the things that's going to be motivating them. So what they do is they go back to England, and they look for a way to leave England but stay in English territory. And they're able to locate a ship. It's called the Mayflower. You've probably heard this story before. And they're able to sign the Mayflower, and they charter it. They're going to go to Jamestown. They're going to go to Virginia. And they set sail September 16th, 1620. The Pilgrims leave England for Virginia on the Mayflower. That's their thing. Now, key thing is, again, we know where they don't end up. They don't end up in Virginia, okay? That's going to be one of those things. But do they know that? Not yet. So what occurs is there's a couple of storms out there. And because they've been moving around so much, their leader decides to change their name from Puritans to Pilgrims, okay? William Bradford is the person that developed a new name for the Pilgrims. He said, look, he wrote a book called The Plymouth Plantation, and he talked about this journey, and it was a religious journey for religious freedom, and he writes about how these Puritans are seeking this, and that this has become a pilgrimage. In other words, it's a journey with a religious purpose. And so when they go on this journey, when he writes this book, people begin calling them pilgrims. As a result, we call these fine people pilgrims today. Where they land, though, is not Virginia. What happens is they get caught up, and we're not sure if it's just a North Atlantic storm. It could have been the remnants of a hurricane. We're not sure. But what happens is weather steps in and changes history. We talked about last week how a mosquito changed history. It gave Nathaniel Bacon malaria last week. Well, weather's going to have a hand in history this time. They travel through rough seas, massive storms, and they are blown way off course. It's anywhere between 800 to 1,000 miles off course. It is way, way, way off course. And when they finally sight land, it's November, and they're looking around, and they know this is not Virginia. And so these pilgrims now get together, and the husbands, this is a family affair, the husbands of the families get together, and they make an agreement. It's called the Mayflower Compact. This is really important here. This is November 21st, 1620. And the Mayflower Compact basically states that they're going to be recognizing the laws of England in this new place. They're going to bring law and order here. They're going to have some type of civilization, and they're going to follow the laws that they had, that they followed in England. It is one of the first attempts at self-government in the colonies. Remember, the House of Burgesses in Virginia was formed in 1619. So here we are a little over a year later. These folks get off the boat, and the first thing they do is create a government, or at least some semblance of a government. And it is important to remember that they do this. The big difference between Jamestown and Plymouth, most of the people that went to Jamestown, well, all of them, especially for like the first 10 years, were all young men seeking their fortune and looking for gold and silver. Plymouth is a completely different animal. Plymouth gets started by people who brought their families. These are husbands and wives and their children, and they're here to start a new life because they're trying to start something because their religious beliefs were being persecuted back in England. This is, obviously about 13 years after Jamestown had started. Their original plan was to get to Virginia. They didn't make it, so they're now going to start this new this new colony called Plymouth. When they land on it, half of the Pilgrims die that first winter. They land on what they call Plymouth Rock, and the winter is very harsh. It wasn't that they weren't prepared. It was just an exceptionally cold winter. It is said that the sea actually froze that year, according to their journals and stuff. So they didn't know what to do. They didn't know how to farm. There was nowhere to store any food. When they landed in November, if you've been, and this is up around the Boston area in Massachusetts, it's going to get cold in the wintertime. So here's the journey. You can kind of see here was the start. The plan was to follow this line. This was the original course. There's Virginia, but they got blown off course. They end up coming off out here and landing over here. So that was the original route, and here's what they ended up doing thanks to that storm and those rough seas. Pilgrims did get help from Native Americans. They learned how to plant crops and hunting and fishing. You probably heard this, the names of Samoset and Squanto. They are the Native Americans from there, and they would come in and they talked, and Samoset brought Squanto. Squanto surprised them because he could speak English, and he becomes a translator for his people. Without the Pilgrims, without the Native Americans, it is every instance is that they probably would not have survived another winter, since half of them had died that first winter. In 1629, they did get a royal charter from Massachusetts Bay Colony. And what happens is the British government sends a guy by the name of John Winthrop as the governor. They have the official charter, and they are England's official second permanent colony in North America. Because they're started here, and because there's so many Puritans back in England, there's a mass movement of people that move from England to Plymouth or Massachusetts Bay Colony, as it's now called, and it's going to be called the Great Migration. They do this to escape religious persecution, as well as there was a massive economic depression in England. So a lot of people were losing jobs, and they thought maybe they would go to this Massachusetts Bay Colony for a new opportunity. We will continue this conversation, and I'm going to compare and contrast a lot of what's going on. This is a little timeline to kind of help you what's going on with where we're at. Here you can kind of see Roanoke, Jamestown. You see that the French and the Spanish are also doing things. And then here's where the Mayflower Compact gets signed, and this is kind of where we're at. Just wanted to share that with you. I'm hoping you guys are having a great Monday. You should have all your quizzes and stuff back by now, and I will see you at the Zoom. All right. Have a good one, guys. Take care. Bye-bye.